Dave, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Excellent. And this is Noreen from the Healthy Peaceful podcast, and I'm welcoming both our viewers and listeners today. And today, as my guest, I have David Chergosky. And David is going to take a moment introducing himself. We're going to be talking about a range of topics, but focused on Ayurveda, healing, meditation. Dave, you got the floor.
Yeah, we spoke a little bit earlier before when you asked me about, talking on your podcast, and you asked me to send you bio information. I actually didn't really get around to doing that, so I'll just take a minute to introduce myself. I've been a yoga instructor, let's see, at least for 10 years now. I've been practicing yoga since about 2003, and I've been working. I worked for Dr. Deepak Chopra for kind of most of the formation of my career in this field. I worked for him for about 12 years, and I kind of like to think I still do work for him in some ways, because I'm part of that same cause, you could say.
That's
But
wonderful.
yeah, and I've kind of branched out on my own in some ways to um, kind of embrace the emphasis in these teachings that I'm led to. But I worked at the Chopra Center first as a volunteer starting back in about 2007, and I worked very closely with Dr. David Simon and Deepak Chopra on the events team. So I heard a lot of Deepak's talks for, gosh, I don't know, we just many times. It was like I did that
Sure.
for years.
And
He's,
these weren't virtual; these were live.
yeah, this was back when we did
Okay,
everything person to
that's right.
person. We had group collective energy in that
That's
way.
great.
And eventually, I went through all the certifications with the Chopra Center, and I became a full-fledged employee. And I taught yoga there and meditation for a number of years. And I lectured on meditation at the Chopra Center and in the general community. I was a personal wellness consultant in the San Diego area using these kind of teachings. And before that, as a massage therapist, I was always interested in alternative medicine and Eastern healing methods like that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So I'm here to talk today a bit about how these understandings really help us to nourish our lives, and really the value of Ayurveda. I may go into some of the specifics of Ayurveda, where we need to kind of get a grasp on that so we kind of can understand, some of what I'm talking about, some of the implications.
That's right.
But yeah, more I'll kind of show us where we need to make some changes in our lifestyle to kind of
Sure.
align with nature and what that means and what the benefit is.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. I'm so looking forward to our conversation, and thanks for that. Thanks for your intro.
Sure.
I know you and I were talking briefly about the value of Ayurveda,
Mm,
and your suggestion of a discussion topic was why now?
mm,
Well, Ayurveda is a science, an art and a science, an ancient healing method, wisdom that's been around 5,000 years, probably more than 5,000 years, but it's an ancient healing system.
mm.
Um, so I'm intrigued by the question, why now? Could you
Yeah,
respond to that?
sure. Yeah, why now? Anytime's a great time for Ayurveda, but there's such there's such a confluence of all these factors of things that are shaping people's personal reality right now. We've reached a time where technologically a person can be exposed to all kinds of influences and all kinds of ideas, and it can be really hard to find like an anchor, something to be founded in, which helps you to evaluate information, which helps you to really see to outline yourself to have the right directives to navigate your life very well. So I think that there'd be nothing better than to be founded in Ayurveda, because the quite literally the name means the wisdom of life. The
Mm,
Ayur means life. Veda means wisdom or knowledge or science. So Ayurveda, by its name, is the knowledge of life, the wisdom of
mm,
life, the science
mm.
of life. And as you pointed to, it's been around for a really long time. Some people say at least 5,000 years, maybe closer to 6,000 years. We don't know exactly. But people have been navigating life This is, in other words, this has stood the test of time. This is tried and true,
Right.
and it may not be that popular in the West yet, but it's picking up steam pretty fast.
Well, it certainly is definitely picking up steam very fast. That I do agree. I like your choice of words in describing why Ayurveda is particularly important right now. You chose the word confluence,
Hmm.
which to me means things are coming together, um, and or things are sort of coming into a whirlpool, the confluence. And you also use the term anchor, and that is true, particularly in these times in 2020 in the pandemic. We can feel really without ground.
Hmm.
So it's reassuring to know that Ayurveda, which is also known as a science of self-healing, that we can actually, that there is a possibility of an anchor with Ayurveda.
Hmm.
Can you speak more fully to that?
Yeah. So when we look at some of the day-to-day life or the day-to-day reality of most people, there's all these things that we're not acknowledging or we're not noticing, but they're very limiting to us. And they come from the condition that we inherit and a lot of just the lack of the formation of an inner truth that kind of allows us to see a bigger picture. Some of the promise of Ayurveda is that we can see that we are the universe. Actually, quite literally, we are the universe posing as this idea. This something that looks topically. If you look at me from the outside in, I look like an individual. But as we do these practices, we kind of peel back the layers of our being and we begin
Mm-hmm.
to see more deeply into that and understand that, for instance, we never really find a witness, but we have this experience of being a witness. So it's like you never really, until we put our attention on it, we don't notice that clearly there must be a ghost in the machine, right? Like there's something that moves me. And when I have passed on and I'm not here anymore, something is clearly left. But it's in some people's mind or in their day-to-day consideration, spirituality, if you want to call it that, is kind of, it could be all kinds of ideas. But if we get clear on that, there's something that's animating this opportunity to experience life. We start to put more attention on that. And
Mm-hmm.
Ayurveda helps us to cultivate that awareness, if you want to call it spiritual awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, we liberate that box of, this, Deepak would often refer to it as a skin encapsulated ego, because that's kind of what we are taught to, for just be largely because of the sciences, the things that are widely agreed upon from what we could call the waking state of consciousness that most people
Mm-hmm.
are experiencing is that they believe quite literally that they're on the interior of a body exclusively and they're kind of in a foreign world or an alien world. um, Meaning, you know what I mean, it's something separate from us. But
Mm-hmm.
Ayurveda teaches us that in reality, you're not actually in the world like that. The world is in you.
Mm.
So we can see that quite literally we're nowhere in particular. I mean, I'm kind of pointing to it directly here, kind of kick
Sure.
it off, or whatever.
Yeah.
But but this is kind of how we start to harness our lives. If you want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about yoga means to harness is one way that we use that word yoga.
Mm-hmm.
So to harness our lives, to create that anchor, to bring it back to that, we start to become the alert witness of ourselves,
Mm.
realizing that that witness isn't specifically anywhere, but we're watching ourselves quite literally as I talk to you or as I play the role. We play a myriad of roles throughout our lives, right? So it's not so much that we don't do it as we did, that we still, we have our ego. Our ego helps us to play the role in a certain way, but we also know that we are this unborn witnessing presence the whole time that becomes self-aware and
Mm-hmm.
as we go through it.
Yeah. I mean, just touching on some of your points. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. In Ayurveda, and this relates to what you're saying. I believe that we hear a lot about you're bringing the macrocosm into the microcosm.
Hmm.
Um, what does that mean to you when you're bringing the universe into you, or the macrocosm into the microcosm?
I almost see you could say it from that direction. I almost see it from the opposite way, that we're
Okay.
letting go of the illusion. It's kind of like we start to make contact with from the inside out. It's just how I see it or say it, or it occurs to me, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's an awareness that you're watching yourself,
Mm.
and that we can cultivate this awareness of the witness. The
Mm-hmm.
witness starts to witness itself. You could
Mm.
say that we create second attention. We realize attention itself, and we realize the arrow of attention, where attention's being put.
Mm.
So, basically, as we go into this idea of Ayurveda, we'll describe how we create balance, this opportunity to create balance in our physiology. Yeah, all the ways that we have an individuality that is uniquely different from everybody else's. So we would balance that appropriately. But we know that what's universally true is that we all start to gain these other abilities, these ideas that I'm talking about. They become truer and truer, even if it's kind of a vague idea at first, but eventually these things start to deliver us from defeating patterns of the self. There's a lot of people struggling right now with mental turmoil, with all the quarantining that people are doing to kind of stop the virus from spreading and stuff. There's a lot of mental illnesses on the rise and stuff like that.
Sure.
A lot of that originates because people don't know how to use, and this is my opinion, but that they don't know how to use the space to cultivate this inner. I say it starts as an inner relationship,
Mm.
um, but to realize their essence in such a way that they start to watch themselves, and that they can mitigate these patterns, these mental patterns. The mindfulness, we could call it, right? A lot of people know about that now. This mindful awareness of the movement of their own mind, but I expand that more to also understand that we have a mindful awareness of your physiology. I call it a mindful body connection.
Sure.
Um, that you can see how the mind and body are integrated
Mm-hmm.
together. And what I want to say to that is also, that's a lot of the promise or the value of Ayurveda, is it puts you in direct understanding, experiential understanding, that nobody can argue with you when you are having a direct experiential understanding that the mind and the body are integrated. And then we bring the mind and body into balance. We feel the integration. We become aware of subtlety. Then we can tap into, you know, the infinite truth of our own being outside of time. Time falls away. These kind of things.
Yeah, I think that the mind body connection is definitely accepted for the most part, mainstream,
Yeah, and
more so today than years ago. But
it is, and yet it is accepted mainstream, and yet if you look at allopathic medicine, it hasn't caught up. By
no,
the
it definitely has not caught up.
Yeah, let's look at that for a second, because
Yeah,
if you look at how the scientific method works, and how doctors are taught as they go through medical school. The longer that they've been in medical school, and they approach a specialization, they're learning more and more about less and less. And as you go to a specialist in this sort of a thing, it's unless they've taken upon if they take it upon their own interest, then they may have some background in holism, this sort of thing, understanding how all these different systems work together and that sort of thing. Um, but that's not what their specialty's in. And we're not just this biomechanical bag of nuts and bolts. We're this dynamic dance, this movement of the elements, and we'll talk a little bit about that in Ayurveda. But as we reshape our perception, that's really a lot of the value of Ayurveda, is we're getting closer to something that's at the core of reality, and we're teaching people to do that, and then they're having the experience of that. That's not something that people, I don't know who can argue with that, except for somebody who hasn't had that experience yet. you know so the allopathic medical system hasn't really been taught that way. It hasn't put focus there. It's there can be things, there's interests behind how drugs and surgery, and how those are coached, and things like that too, somewhat too, along.
yeah. Well, it's no doubt that allopathic medicine is definitely takes a compartmentalized approach.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong,
Um,
they that's saved my both my parents' lives in different ways. By now,
yeah,
we shine in acute medical emergencies. We shine. I mean, that's
sure.
for what we're able to do. We've saved a lot of lives. So I'm not knocking that, but it's just how the training has been, and where we haven't really had validation or credible research done yet. A lot of the
Hmm.
stuff that we can already experience is left behind. That's why people go to people like me or wellness consultants who have a different training and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Um, I know you and I talked a little bit about some really beautiful words relating to Ayurveda: holiness, wholeness, and health.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so we want to understand, because I think that this will give people a lens to look through, hopefully for the rest of their lives. These are definitions in some ways that were given to me by the late Dr. David Simon, who was one of my main teachers. He was very much there, a very pinnacle part of the Chopra Center for Well-being at the time that I was there, and I've never outgrown these definitions, so I pass them on to you with that reverence. Is to understand that at the root of these words, it's the same recognition. Is that when we look at this word, which is health or healing, okay, or we look at holism, holistic, or we look at holiness, they're actually the same underlying recognition. They're this same underlying understanding that has actually been reached. So if we consider healing, what are we trying to heal? Well, we're trying to return to a state of holiness, which is to say wholeness.
Mm.
I won't make that something lofty where it's a higher angelic being than us or something like that. Something that we're not. It's a kind of a movement toward our own wholeness. That's kind of what it is to ascend in consciousness. I believe in many ways. It's to understand. I can make it very concrete. It's to understand that there's a witnessing presence, you know, there's the act of witnessing, and there's that which is witnessed. There's these three aspects of being, but when they're silently unified without any movement in the mind, that's wholeness. Okay, that's if nothing else, take that away, because that'll if I did my job right, then that'll haunt you for the rest of your life. Is that you will always understand that that's how far maybe out of balance we are. It's when we stop, we turn our attention inwards. Is there the movement of a separate self playing itself out in the mind, or is this a silently unified field? Are we the
Mm.
ground state of the universe? When we close our eyes and when
Mhm.
we stop, is there the peace and the bliss of an infinite surrender, which is that wholeness? That's our core. That's that truth, is that wholeness. And everything that we're using for healing is supposed to lead us back to that state. That's how I navigate healing approaches, to be honest, in different healing modalities. Is will they return me to a state of kind of like internal emptiness?
Mm.
Um, so that's what that meant.
Yeah, yeah, that's really lovely. Thank you. Um, when I think about, I like what you said about healing, that it's not about adding something, but it's about returning. In Ayurveda, particularly, it's about coming home, bringing yourself back, returning to
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
a
David
state,
Simon.
a state of balance, a state of homeostasis,
Yeah,
and
Dr.
and to
David.
who you truly are.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
our true essence.
Hmm.
Dr. David Simon would call it the return of the memory of wholeness.
Mm.
He had a book by that name. That he wrote, and
Okay.
so it's this return of the memory of wholeness that we're creating as we become more aware through making ourselves feel better. You see, people are kind of like these patternistic kind of machines. I mean, a lot of the ways that our day-to-day state of consciousness is that we do the same thing to enliven ourselves. If we don't know much about Ayurveda, if we don't understand our constitutional type, our unique elemental balance, we haven't really talked about that yet, so I'll say real quick, there are five elements. They're sometimes called the Panchamaha Bhutas. I'm not going to say too much Sanskrit in this, but well, just understanding that through this model, there's space, air, fire, water, and earth. And so it's these five building blocks that are actually creating everything that we see and hear and experience. Everything like that comes through our five senses is this confluence of these five elements. But until we become aware as a choice making witness, we're not really training ourselves to align those into a unique balance that suits, our soul, that suits the unique makeup or individuality that we are. So
Hmm.
that's a lot of the promise of, or the value of Ayurveda too, is that we look into that, more
Sure,
succinctly.
sure. We recognize that we're not separate from nature, that everything in nature, including um, human beings, are, that we're composed of these elements that you just described, ether, air, fire, water, and earth.
Yeah, and so and people can look deeper into this next part, more than I won't go into all the Ayurveda, the technical, the classical Ayurveda training stuff, but it's
Sure.
just that understanding that that was a recognition made by the rishis, we could say, and some people will say, oh, the rishis were like these higher angelic spiritual beings. Some people will say that they were just people that they got together to have a conversation about the nature of reality, and they recognized this. So there's different people. Will say like some stories sound more mythical, some sound a little bit more like logically kind of grounded or whatever.
Hmm.
But in one way or another, a state of consciousness was reached where the understanding that transformed everything then and transforms everything now seems to work, is that there are these five elements. And they recognized also that these five elements pair themselves together in three different ways. So, air and space, the first two pair together, and you can see this as soon as we put our attention on this, you notice this and it changes everything. But air, there's movement, there's wind, it blows, there's the movement of air. We know that there's air, and we know that there's space because objects are separate, even though space is kind of hard to identify. We don't say point at space, but we notice the absence of things. That's it makes a recognition indirectly by its absence.
Mm-hmm.
But space and air pair together and they create this principle of reality called Vada, is the Sanskrit name, but the idea is that it's this principle of movement and change. Because we notice that the only thing in reality that doesn't change is that change is constant. Everything's constantly changing. Okay, so that's air and space giving us that aspect of a three-dimensional reality. Um, and this is nothing new age. This is not, this is not, this is ancient. This, I don't get
Sure,
anything,
sure. It's not, yeah.
and nothing too woo woo. I don't think with
Yeah.
but and then so that's air and space, and then fire and water. Those pair together to create this principle of metabolism and transformation. And it's harder maybe a little bit to see that, but we know that everything is in a state of transformation. Energy is always transforming, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So and then the last concept is the pairing of water and earth together, and those create this principle of kapha. That's the Sanskrit word. I don't know if I said the principle for metabolism and transformation, but that's pitta.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, kapha, the pairing of water and earth together, gives us all the physical stuff that we see, the firmament, everything that we can look upon as an object. Basically, that's the solidification of the most solid, dense, gross structure of reality, which gives us the material world. But everything else is this transforming of energy and the movement and everything, and that's what gives us the experience of life. And as I say, yet we're nowhere in particular, but we start to when we realize that we're nowhere in particular, we start watching ourselves from the outside in, is what
Mm.
happens. And so we can start to make all kinds of more skilled choices when we start to see this. But again, to really have this, I'm just kind of planting a lot of seeds with some of this to
Sure.
start to give yourself more of an understanding with this. You start to look at what it takes to live an Ayurvedically balanced lifestyle, because that makes these things come true. It makes it become more and more true. You know,
Right. It's not, we're not just having, it's not an intellectual, we don't, it's not, we're not just intellectualizing these things. When
yeah,
you put them into practice, and you have the awareness of your particular, and then when you're looking at the doshas, the Vata, Pitta, Kapha,
yeah,
every individual has a unique constitution.
Right. And yeah, so you mentioned the word dosha, and that's the Sanskrit word
Hmm.
that is that recognition that we have a unique constitution, which is to
Hmm.
say we are all a unique, you know, um, kind of texture of these five building blocks. We are all this unique proportioning, I should say, and that's genetically determined. So that's what gives us the experience of our individuality. If you look into Ayurveda, you'll see that there's thousands of years of observation of human beings and how we are woven as an individuality to help us look at the different physical characteristics and behavioral characteristics that help us to determine, okay, this person is a predominant vata dosha. This is an air and space person. Like I'm an air and space person. I talk a lot. I'm kind of windy, and my mind goes a lot of directions. You know, the fire type people, which is that principle of fire and water. Sometimes it's just called fire. But those are the really focused people. The intellect is very sharp, and they tend to make, like, they're good decision makers when they're in balance. But we start to understand. See, okay, big part of the value of Ayurveda is that we depersonalize human behavior. We see that a person who thinks that they're on the inside of a body, a first person protagonist in a personal story going on in space time, is not really that close to the present moment, and we can get closer to our own essence, as we do this stuff,
Hmm.
as we look into this. But anyway, the fire type people, that they're more about, like, kind of like a type A personality when we look at it like that, like a
Sure.
psychological type A personality.
Good
uh,
business people, they entrepreneurs, they, like you said, they're organized, and when
they're
they're in
leaders.
balance, they
Yeah.
they
Well,
can.
they're leaders, but when that
Right.
when that fire gets out of balance, they
Mm.
scorch the village.
Mm.
That kind of thing. They're they look to see who kind of made things a problem for them. Whereas the
Sure.
air and space people are more introverts in some ways, but they're more energetic. They like to be the life of the party, but they experience, like, acute depression, that kind of thing. Whereas the pitta types, they'll experience anger. So the elements make the energy do different things.
I see. So when one of the doshas is out of balance, whether it's vata, pitta, or kapha, it's going to manifest in different ways
Hmm.
depending on. And my understanding with Ayurveda is that um, we all have these particular elements, where but we have different. Like, for instance, I have elements of um, vata, pitta, kapha, the five elements to the three doshas, but the predominance of one over the other is going to be different in me than for someone else.
Yeah,
But I'm going to be composed of all three.
right. We all are.
So.
We are all five of the elements, but
Mhm.
it's that determination made by a very simple test. We call it a Prakruti test. People can look that up on the internet. If they haven't taken one, that's my main piece of advice: is take a Prakruti test. You know,
Right.
I'm not good at spelling in my head, but it's Prakuti, I believe. Oh, sorry, Kruti, Prakruti.
Prakriti, yeah.
Prakruti.
Do you
So
think those, do you like those questionnaires, those self-assessments, or do you suggest if someone really wants to get in touch with what their unique constitution is, in terms of Vata, Pitta, Kapha, that they see an Ayurvedic practitioner?
no, I mean, I do like a lot of personal wellness consultations when people have something specific that they want to go to me for, and which is kind of the other side of that test, is the Vrekruti, when they have specific things they want to work on. We can just call it that. Oh, they say they want to work on something, then that means to me, okay, what's the Vrekruti doing? That's the snapshot of the elements in this moment. But, when you reinterpret life this way, I can look at the elemental balance. I can look at the dosha that we determined that they are, and I can look at what tends to be out of balance for that person right now. Usually, what's out of balance is a correlation to their tendency that I can already see from their Prakriti, what we established their
Sure.
unit doshas to be, but not always.
Okay.
And but no, to answer your question, I don't think they need to do that off the bat. I think there's a lot of value to creating first this self-interest with Ayurveda to get that
Okay.
curiosity with people, because they can look and they can find a bunch of dosha tests online and start to
Sure.
see themselves in the traits. And this is what makes Ayurveda become a very real thing, a very alive thing.
Okay. Well, that's a really good suggestion. I mean,
And
so
there's
they
lots of them.
they
Yeah.
can. It's good to just to fuel your curiosity and start learning, engage in self-learning, and then
Yeah.
not necessary unless you're, right away to see a practitioner unless you have particular health concerns, but just to get an idea what your type is, what your dosha is.
Right. I'm really big on encouraging so much, because this is how we evolve our connection to our nervous system too. It's like I said, people are these they're kind of, very patternistic. They do the same behaviors, and they kind of, it's kind of like a record player, like we get in the same groove, but sometimes we get
Yes.
stuck in a rut. So
Sure.
kind of the mission with Ayurveda is to get you from being stuck in a rut to being in a groove. And we do that
That's
through being
great.
balanced again.
Yeah, I love that. I think that recently in rereading Deepak Chopra's book Perfect Health, just thinking about how do we move away from conditioned patterns? You're stuck in rut description. How do we move away from conditioned patterns of thinking, behaving, the grooves? And I know one of the things you and I touched on previously was that Ayurveda really opens us up, perhaps through its marriage with meditation
Mhm.
and stillness, encouraging that to infinite potential in our lives, infinite possibilities.
Yeah.
Could you describe what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, well, when we see all the ways that we don't necessarily, okay, this is important to say, because we don't know that we're imbalanced oftentimes. We take that as our personality, but it can be quite a departure from our personal potential. We're not the embodiment of Ayurveda yet. We're just looking at even entertaining some information casually, right? If we haven't heard it yet or at the moment, and looking at what kind of difference it might make with our lives. Um, but yeah, the promise is, again, that the limiting behaviors fall off when we start to understand the correlations. And that's what I wasn't going to go into too much today, but we see that through our five senses. Let's say we'll use me. I'm a vata dosha. I'm a wind, predominantly a wind and air and space predominant elements kind of a person. I know that that's the biggest factor playing it out in my physiology. And so I know that that's going to give me certain behaviors and stuff like that, and it also coaches me through understanding the correlations. I know what things I need to be able to do to give myself to try different choices I wouldn't have tried before. I didn't have this health information. I was using other kinds of health information, and it wasn't curing imbalance. It wasn't giving me opportunities to have greater abilities.
Mm.
It wasn't working like that yet.
Hmm.
So, but now, a lot of the limiting behaviors have fallen away. I mean, I can't tell you how many things I've overcome personally, just because I didn't know I was leading myself into greater imbalance. Like for instance, I thought for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I should eat good nutrition. I studied all kinds of Western nutrition at first. So I'd eat like a lot of raw foods and things like that, and get like, which I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but we want to have the right balance of qualities at the essence of these elements, this understanding of looking at life as elements. There are these qualities. The elements have qualities. It's like, look at space. Space is cold, right? So if I have, and wind blows cold. If I'm already that, I want to stay warm. Like in the winter, people who have cold hands or cold feet, cold nose, or that kind of thing, they're probably, more susceptible to the cold, right? It's like, it's common sense in a lot of ways. Ayurveda is
Sure.
common sense. Don't get me
Yeah. Yeah.
wrong.
Well, you're talking about the that there's these in Ayurveda there's 25 qualities that um, practitioners will look at in terms of, um, for instance, if you're predominantly Vata, then dryness is inherently part of Vata, and
Right.
how can you balance these particular qualities that can really shift the state of your health.
Yeah, there's basically 20 different qualities. They call them the 20 gunas.
Hmm.
And so basically they're divided where basically each dosha gets about seven of them. Some of them have a similar one in combination because if you look at how those elements are paired, some of them have they share the same element. Only space and air are paired together and get their own dosha. But water belongs to both kapha and pitta. Anyway, it's good to keep reviewing the basics of Ayurveda with that part. But just understanding that, yeah, if because of my elemental predominance, I tend to be dry. Like if I get dry skin, that's a Vata trait. This is how an Ayurvedic practitioner is going to look at you and kind of determine things. And so we want to balance it with its opposite. A lot of people say, "Oh, if I'm dry, I want wet," and like, no. If you take a shower, for instance, it's not always obvious, but it's like if you look at it this way, if you take a shower and then you get wet, is that the opposite of dry? No, it's not. Oily is actually the opposite of dry. So we need to,
Mm-hmm.
for in that case, for instance, but it's understanding how to get wise about using the things that will bring us into balance and what throws us out of balance, you
Hmm.
know, in all
Yeah.
these different ways. And sorry, but I get off on tangents a little bit.
No, that's okay because we were talking about you were describing using yourself as an example for how Ayurveda really opens up the possibility of living your life
Yeah,
to your
one.
fullest potential. And I one thing I liked I'd like to just touch on that you mentioned was in looking at ways of habits, condition ways of living, thinking that as you started to really delve into this art and science of Ayurveda, some of the things that you were doing, or some of your daily habits, or it doesn't have to be you, it could be any person who's really wants to do a self-analysis and self-examination, they started to really drop away.
Hmm.
It
Yeah,
was it wasn't something that it sounds like I love that because it's not like you're aggressively forcing it out of your life. It just no longer becomes part of you or important.
right. Yeah, if you start to see truth in this, some of my teachers, I think David Simon said, this is not like really a personal transformation. If you become exposed to this information, watch out because it'll inevitably it lives through you. When you start to see how well it works, when you get a little bit of grounding in the education around these correlations, and
Yeah.
you start to, when we see that we become more comfortable, this holism starts to live through us. This wholeness starts to embrace itself through our lives. And the ego that was maybe once in the driver's seat, navigating, using everything that it did to continue to enliven itself, to protect itself,
Hmm.
to kind of keep the conditioned patterns going, because that's the most enlivened truth we knew previously. Those aren't in the driver's seat anymore. So that's how we're getting the personal limitations out of the way. It just happens quite naturally. We don't have to try. It's not a forceful thing, really.
Yeah, yeah, that's really wonderful. Um, let's see what else we talked about.
And I would,
Oh, actually, this was also in the book Perfect Health, but the purpose of life is to really to enjoy life, to experience joy.
yeah,
And how does Ayurveda support that?
yeah. Well, I thought it was it's really because people talk about like what is the purpose of life, and who can really answer that and stuff like that. But Ayurveda is really about common sense,
Mm.
and I don't. Well, just look at it by its converse. Does somebody think that the purpose of life is to not enjoy it? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make your physiology work well. Everybody has the right to be happy. If you didn't get told that yet, then you need to hear it. You do, because a lot of people are playing out a suffering story, something that they inherited. Different things we have in the mind, self-worth problems. I mean, in my personal story, I don't really think I had the right to be talking about this stuff. I wouldn't have thought I would ever. If you were to ask me when I was much younger. Um, but that's the truth of it, is that if you're doing something, whatever you think the purpose of your life is, if it's not to enjoy your life, I'll bet whatever you think the purpose is that you're doing, you enjoy it. And if you're in your purpose, I mean, it may not look like going out and seeking pleasure based enjoyment with everything, but You might be doing all kinds of service work and stuff like that, but who doesn't enjoy being wholehearted, and who doesn't enjoy being happy? Whatever it is, if we look at it in this just broad sense, the
Mm.
purpose of life is to enjoy it. So sometimes we want to get those limiting things out of the way, because that can be going on for a lot of people. I certainly had for me for a long time.
Absolutely. Um, and how do you think that Ayurveda supports joy? I don't want to,
Yeah, yeah, no, I'll answer it.
how does Ayurveda support
Well,
living a happy life?
because if we get stuck in these traits, these patterns, these obstacles, if you
Right.
get hung up on attachments, it's actually not enjoyable. If you're
Mm.
angry, it's not enjoyable. If you're sad, it's not enjoyable. It's taking away, it's changing the trajectory of something that's more fully your birthright, which is
Hmm.
to be enjoying life. And that's the only thing that brings us together as a collective sanity. So we're always masterminding. If you look at what evolves in life, and I'll get into my definition of evolution in a minute, but if you look at what we keep doing in general, like outside of our own personal lives, what keeps happening is life is masterminding itself. Life is always masterminding itself to enjoy itself more. Take a look at what we seek, what we put attention on and money on, and what we do research in and develop technologies around. We're trying to make life more enjoyable. Um, I'm not opposed to that, but it needs to be done holistically, because otherwise we'll find that there's a backlash of things that we don't enjoy, discomfort that we do inherit, like if we don't take care of the environment and that sort of thing, or if we do too much time enjoying video games or something, but we're imbalanced in our mind and our attentions, like, and we're all ADD or something like that, you know stuff like that you know
Sure,
yeah.
sure. Absolutely.
um
Well, it sounds like in thinking about joy or enjoyment,
and can I say one more thing about that?
sure, yeah,
So
absolutely.
we're becoming more aware of our spirit. I kind of point to that, we notice we're the witness of ourselves. That's kind of like our soul. I mean, it's not kind of like, it is. We realize that there's a consciousness there. We start to realize that there has to be a dreamer of the dream, or we wouldn't know we were in the dream. And so we put attention on that, where consciousness is becoming conscious of itself.
Mm.
That's the soul. The soul is glimpsing itself. That's a state of consciousness called glimpsing the soul. That's what starts to come in after just the waking state. You realize you're in the waking state, but you're also conscious of consciousness, and you're watching yourself now. And with that, we notice that some things are more enlivening or less enlivening, if we want to say it that way. Well, it's really enlivening to us to have our physiology in balance, and that's where vitality comes from. Joy is when you have this free flowing movement of your, what you could call life force or prana or chi. I know you're talking to me about macrobiotics at one point. This awareness of chi, um, as we have this recognition, that's the kind of the wellspring of this joy. And so we that stops being overshadowed as much, is kind of my what I want to say about that too. We start to
Yeah.
harness and balance ourselves so we can experience more joy. It's the departure
Mm.
from joy. It's the departure from our essence that
Hmm.
that we don't have to put up with as much, because we're more fully in that all the time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I like the word enliven too. To me, using that word, it to me it seems like you're more able to touch your own experience.
Mhm.
The enlivening of your life.
Yeah.
You know.
I like to use that in the word nourishment. We start to see
Hmm.
how to use all these different things, because all the elements around us, everything has these properties, these interactive properties. And we start to see, okay, this is, if I'm a Vata type and I need to have this kind of in my lifestyle this often to be balancing for me, certain type of exercise, everything is coded in the five elements. Everything is coded in the doshas, so we can start to look and start to plot a lifestyle that alleviates the, personal suffering and stuff like that. And so we can be at our most creative. We can be at our most expansive awareness and most outgoing. Being the embodiment that really we were designed for. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
that's and I know we have to go in a minute. I want to kind of close on um, bringing back into the idea of evolution. you
Sure.
know because a lot of things, when we look at evolution, what is evolutionary? um Ayurveda has a couple of definitions I want to share as we close. Is that it says that the goal of goals, if there is such a thing, is there a goal to having goals? What is really the goal behind all of our goals? The goal of goals is this exaltation of the spirit. And that's what I'm talking about with the joy. When we understand that we are a spiritual essence, then we're no longer identified topically with the body. We're recognizing that we're nowhere in particular as we play our first person role. And so the goal of goals is this exaltation of the spirit. So we stay in expansive identity to ourselves. And then other than that, it's also that this awareness of evolution is that evolution, if Ayurveda says that what's evolutionary is the expansion of happiness. If it doesn't make us happy, we can't really call it evolutionary. We might be making a temporary modification or a change to how we're doing something like that. But as we stay more in the state of joy and we stay closer to our soul, we stay evolutionary. We stay expanding our happiness.
Mm, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Um, that's so cool. That's great. Um, and you said in Ayurveda, the goal of all goals is the exaltation of the spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Well, this has really been a wonderful discussion, Dave, and I would love to continue it on the topic of Ayurveda and get into more of the nuances. I think we're just touching, really just touching the surface today. Um, I would certainly like to share with our viewers and listeners how they can reach you or get in touch, or
Yeah. For now, I'm serving in the yoga ashram, so I'm in the practice of service right now. I'm just,
Mhm.
if people want to get in touch with me, and also I'm kind of quarantining right now, so I can't do as much. I'm already serving at this, and so that kind of, there's nothing specifically that I want to plug. I just want to get people
Sure,
interested in Ayurveda, and hopefully,
sure.
if they liked our talk today, then they'll get back to you and tell you what they want more of and what kind of
That's great. They can get in touch with me, and I can
reach out to me.
reach out. I'd love to do that, and I'll include that in the show notes as well.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. I really enjoyed our discussion, and
Me too.
and you sharing your wisdom and knowledge on Ayurveda, meditation, yoga, with our viewers and listeners of the Healthy Peaceful podcast.
Yeah,
And so,
in closing, I'd tell your listeners, go find a Prakriti test, take that test, and then come back to us with your questions. You know,
that would be
Great.
we could do a live show on that. I think we'd have a ball with that.
Yeah, or if people just email you with whatever kind of thing we want to address, stuff like
That'd
that.
be that'd be great. I love that. It's a great suggestion too.